Well, hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. Well, after yesterday with American History X, I felt like I needed something light. I needed an antidote, really. And considering that we are now deep into Olympic season, I thought there wouldn't be a better film to discuss than the comedy sports drama classic that is Cool Runnings. I grew up with this film. I mean, it is practically a staple of my youth. I must have watched it at least half dozen times within the first 10 years of my life. Then I definitely went through a long, long stretch without having seen it. Probably twice as long, maybe about 20-ish years. And so coming back to it, it's funny really the things that immediately come back to you. Of course, Sanka, are you dead? You know, that just wonderful moments that make the film so authentic and full of heart, funny, and yet at the same time with, a serious story about people who are trying to succeed against all odds. It's one of those films, I suppose, that I can be a little critical of what you might call basic storytelling principles. As in, I'm currently reading or rereading Save the Cat at the minute. And Save the Cat is a book about the fundamentals of script writing in Hollywood. And those are key fundamentals, partly for, good pacing, good storytelling, but also for following a strong Hollywood model that will sell your story. And unfortunately, on the one hand, I appreciate and acknowledge, knowing the sort of fundamentals, because of course, any artist knows what the fundamentals are before they try to break them. Because of course, my almost artistic rebellious instinct is to want to push against tried and true methods. Now, of course, every film student, drama student, art student, in the history of the art form have wanted to break and push against convention. I think that is part of the process. So, of course, you get a lot of university or college films that try to do, subversive things, but without the fundamentals and without a respect and acknowledgement of key storytelling components. That's how stories end up being messy, confused. That's how you end up with even big budget films like Mother, where the story is, you end up with just this verbal diarrhea of ideas, where it's just whatever it was in the mind of the artist at the time. And of course, having talked about people like David Lynch, Andy Kaufman, these are people who absolutely want to push the boundaries of storytelling. But from that, as I say, you have to respect how sometimes, despite everything I've just sort of soapboxed about the idea of pushing boundaries and trying different stories, sometimes simple is good. Because Cool Runnings is almost the definition of an incredibly simple story. I couldn't believe that the film only runs at about 99 minutes. And it is such a... It has such basic principles of story beats, characters, settings. It really only has two settings, which is the Caribbean island in which they're based, and then the Canadian setting where the Olympics are. Now, I remember the Caribbean setting being a lot longer, making it being split essentially into two halves. It's not. It's roughly the first act before the second act, which makes up the final hour of the film, is entirely set in Canada. And like I say, there's just the characters are very baseline. You have your traditional hero, your comedy guy, your aggressive guy, and your by the book guy. And they are very basic characters, and yet there's just something about them. And I don't know if it was John Turtletub's sort of style of directing or the chemistry or sort of the Caribbean setting that just gave it that extra edge to their the bounce of their character work. Particularly between DeReese and Sanka. They have a really good chemistry. Obviously straight man and comedy guy bounce off each other really well. But even Yul Brynner and Junior, they have a really strong arc, between one guy who feels the burden of having ruined two of his their later colleagues or sporting team members' chances to make the Olympics on their own sprinting merits, and this other guy resenting him, and yet over the course of the film they develop a bond and a friendship and a respect that's so subtle and, as I say, simple. It's not mired in complexity. This is the reason he doesn't like, Yul Brynner doesn't like Junior. These are the way Junior tries to make up for it. These are the way that authentically they actually do bond over, self-respect, wanting more, finding the common ground and the shared sportsmanship experience. And of course, John Candy, this is such a great performance for him, and of course, there is that sense of, this was the last film in which he featured before he died, with only two more films after, and again he just works so well with these young guys, and they don't keep him. You could easily just have him as strict coach, guy who doesn't want to be there, who doesn't want to be the coach, who then gets turned around and becomes a really good coach. But they give him extra beats and layers and relationships. And again, there is something quite simple to it. It's the fact that he cheated during his Olympic time in the Olympics. And obviously that's destroyed his reputation. But again, it feeds into the underdog relationship of them, that all five of them have something to prove. Possibly the exception of Sanka. He just sort of is having a good time. But, they do all five have something to prove. And again, it's to do with the fact that sort of, that you wouldn't think something as simple as Jamaica wanting to be a bobsledding team would, to me, it's that strange thing, I suppose, where, you think, well, that's not the strangest idea in the world, and yet, obviously, the contrast of ideas, the idea of, the people from this incredibly hot country wanting to do a sport that's basically, practiced and trained within ice climate. There is I suppose, an ideological difference there, and even though I'm, as an adult, I tilt my head and go, is that ridiculous? Of course, it's historically based, so there is that sense of, Jamaican bobsledding team, that's sort of new and novel, whatever year 89, in which it took place, but it's not the strangest thing in the world, whereas obviously the film slightly highlights that, slightly, makes it more ridiculous to give them more of a sense of the underdog. And like I say, this is the perfect antidote to American History X, because it is about, national pride, identity, wanting acknowledgement and respect from, of your nation and, your people. And yet, whereas American History X is this sort of warped, disturbed version of it, of someone who only wants to create walls and boundaries and borders and believes in only difference. This is, it's very hard at the minute. We're going through an era, historically speaking, particularly in Britain, where national pride is conflated with racist ideas and anti-outsider, international ideas. And so it's very hard to sort of identify what true national pride looks like. I mean, we've recently had the issue with the Euros and the fact that, whereas we should have left with a sense of pride having made it to the finals, the fact that the three players who are essentially were blamed for the sport were all three black players, sort of highlights the fundamental racist nationalist ideas that still, sort of we have issues in our society. And so it is difficult to sort of think, well, how do you represent national pride and, a sense of national, sort of push forward a sense of national identity. And again, Cool Runnings does it beautifully because, of course, they want to be respected and acknowledged on on an international platform because they are true sportsmen and they are, they deserve respect. And even though this film is broadly speaking a comedy, it's not, something can be funny without being, just because something is funny doesn't mean it doesn't want to be taken seriously. And I think that's sort of the fundamental core of this story, is the idea of, they have a good relationship and they're quite funny people and they have no issues with laughing at themselves and laughing at the sort of quirkiness of their community, but they want to be respected. And I think there's something about that that's really admirable in this film. And it really delves deep into questions of identity, questions of, how far you're willing to go and, what exactly what drives you as a person. And again, as someone who isn't a sports person really in the real world, as it were, sports aren't exactly something that I'm drawn to naturally, although I do, like anyone, find certain sports interesting. I appreciate and acknowledge that the sporting platform is a great environment for people to discover self-respect, pride, a sense of purpose, and international connection. Even though, of course, historically speaking, the film diverts from the historical event of the '89 Winter Olympics, where in real life they were actually encouraged and supported by the international community. In the film, there's this sort of tension and sort of they're, criticized and bullied by the other nations and the Olympic Committee, where, and the point of that obviously is to sort of emphasize the underdog nature of the characters. But ultimately, if we're going back to the history of it, the idea of things like the Olympics is supposed to be in the spirit of international connection and people finding a platform where they can compete and go up against each other, but bond through it. And I think even though the film, like I says, doesn't quite follow the historical account, the ending, where of course they're applauded, is so beautiful and so admirable. I think it's like I say, considering people go, "Oh, Cool Runnings, it's a comedy about Jamaican bobsledders," I think there's a sense of pride and self-respect that I don't think many other films of any kind capture so well. It also makes me sort of jump to Eddie the Eagle, the other film set weirdly at the exact same Olympic Games. Again, about an underdog who joined a sport, and I think that film, I don't know what it was about that Olympic period or sort of the characters, but I think it also tries to capture that same spirit of, someone who could be considered a joke and makes a joke of themselves to some degree, but ultimately, there is a serious strand, a vein in that person. And I think, and that is a really good film. If there's if you wanted to do a double bill, Cool Runnings and Eddie the Eagle is a really nice pairing. But yeah, I do think this is a wonderful film, and definitely worth returning to again and again. And if you ever need uplifting, I definitely think this is the kind of film that does so well. And again, the comedy of it is wonderful. It doesn't lean too hard on verbal jokes or long set pieces. A lot of the jokes take place in montages or just subtle funny moments that are picked up, the joke happens, and are dropped. And I think it's unfortunately a bad habit in comedy at the minute that we've sort of lost that. But again, the humour's brilliant, the heart is brilliant. It's just a great, great film. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below and share the video because this will help me in the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Check out my back catalogue of over 200 videos and follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I tweet about films, TV shows, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube, either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.